people would say, many selves, like, that might mean that I'm crazy. Okay. So part of that is the dominance of the single self assumption, as you call it. And also a part of that is how out of that dominance, the sort of modern understanding of multiple selves came to be through how media explored the multiple personality phenomenon. So can you talk a little bit about how the way in which we approach the multiple personality pathology has sort of shaped the way we would sort of culturally by default assume that multiple selves would mean that there's something wrong with us?
Sure. Well, after Freud, and we can come back to him or any of the earlier history later, selves pretty much went underground everywhere except Sri Aurobindo and a couple of other places, Gurdjieff, for example, and psychosynthesis with Roberto Assagioli. But in general, the idea only surfaced again in the United States, at least, in the book and then the movie, Three Faces of Eve. And then pretty soon we had Sybil, which had its own scandal where the person who wrote Sybil later on said that they conspired with each other and it was never a real thing. But the idea of not only that you could have different selves, but that necessarily means you're either crazy or in a horror movie, like something like Split or United States of Tara, which gets pretty weird. They're linked. So that's the only place in the book we quote my old friend Ken Wilber is about him helping us to disambiguate schizophrenia from multiple selves. They're different things. Schizophrenia is sort of a breakdown it's a biological breakdown. And yes, there is more incohesive selves and there is more ideation of voices, but that's very different than normal multiplicity like you and I have, where, I have my dad's self and I have I'm working with my client self and I'm hanging out with my old friend self. Those are all very distinct and you would know that those are different. So the problem has come that the idea of having more than one self equals in the logical mathematical mind of social parlance, it equals being crazy. There's no room really at all. Every now and then you see someone who's done things in a lot of fields and you go, well, how did you do, so many things? It's like when Jean Houston responded in an interview once, how do you do so many things? And her response to the interviewer was, how do you do so few? I have a part of me that loves classical music. And there's a part of me that loves rock and roll. And they're not the same part. They're not there at the same time. So, this idea that if you take a model where having selves is normal and you get people who would be diagnosed with multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, whose selves are not well associated with each other, who are not cohesive enough, and we ultimately use the criterion of cohesiveness. And we have this whole left, x-axis model that we can go through. But if you realize that most of us have a normal amount of cohesiveness, we remember most of the things that one of ourselves said to other people. We act in ways that don't freak out other people by switching too much in real time. That's kind of normal multiplicity. And the more you're aware of that, the more you can learn how to be in the right mind at the right time. One of the book's catchphrases, very easily, without learning a lot of lingo, without doing a lot of exercises. It's just an awareness that if I walk down that road into that self that always fights with, my friend about this one issue, and he's already in that part of who he is, we will have a fight. If you realize that, you don't have to do that. You can be more compassionate to the part of that other person who's tweaked out when you recognize they have these different parts and that they're not all the same. And some of them have different issues and some of them have different agendas, but they're all real, and figuring out how to, coherently have them all work together is really the goal here. But to say that having more than one self in and of itself, funny term, makes you crazy, is just absolutely missing the picture. When I know that I have more than one self and learn how to shift into that, that's the exact, definition of sobriety and pragmatic effectiveness and authenticity for me.